The palace was quiet, yet heavy with emotion. Behind the tall windows of Windsor, Prince William and Princess Kate received news that shattered their mourning. A beloved family member, gone, just like that. In that instant, the weight of duty melted away. They were no longer the future king and queen. They were simply a husband and wife, clutching each other's trembling hands, fighting back tears as their children slept peacefully upstairs. The world outside saw titles, crowns, and protocols. But inside those walls, it was just two hearts breaking in unison, a private moment of loss that soon became a nation and shared grief. Before we dive into this deeply emotional journey, take a second to hit like, subscribe, and share this story with others who believe in the power of love, resilience, and family. It helps our community grow and ensures more people can reflect on these truly human moments behind royal life. Now, let us uncover how William and Kate turned their private pain into a public moment that moved millions. The morning sun slipped quietly through the tall windows of Windsor Castle, casting golden stripes across the floor. Normally it was a welcome light, gentle, reassuring, a promise of an ordinary day. But on this morning the light felt harsh, almost intrusive. Catherine, Princess of Wales, sat at her desk, her hand frozen around a letter she hadn't yet finished signing. Then came the sound, the sharp vibration of her phone followed by the pale look on her face. The news had arrived. A beloved member of their family was gone. Just like that. The world inside the palace shifted forever. William hadn't yet heard. Still in his study, still dressed in his casual morning clothes, he was making notes about an upcoming engagement when Catherine walked in. She didn't need to say much. The look in her eyes told him more than words could. When she finally spoke the truth, he felt it hit like a blow to the chest. Only days earlier, they had been laughing with this relative, planning a holiday visit. And now, silence. It was a silence that pressed down on the room, thick and heavy, until Catherine reached for his hand. It was trembling. At that moment, they weren't royals. They weren't future monarchs. They were simply a husband and a wife, standing together, struggling to take in the unimaginable. Grief doesn't care about palaces or titles. It doesn't pause for crown or duty. It simply arrives, stealing breath and bending hearts. Upstairs, their children were still asleep. George, Charlotte, and little Louis, blissfully unaware that when they opened their eyes, the world would not be the same as when they had gone to bed. William looked up toward the ceiling, as though he could see through the walls to his children's rooms. The thought of explaining the news to them made his chest tighten further. How do you tell a child that someone they love will never walk through the door again? The hours that followed were tender and raw. Breakfast was quieter than usual. The children noticed. George, thoughtful as ever, asked why the palace staff seemed busier, moving briskly through the halls. William knelt down, meeting his son's eyes. He explained gently. Their family had lost someone very special, someone who had loved them deeply. Charlotte's eyes welled with tears almost immediately, her sensitive heart feeling the weight of the news. Louis, still so young, asked the simplest of questions. When will we see them again? Catherine pulled him close, her voice soft as she explained that sometimes people live on only in our hearts and our memories. It was a moment that tested every instinct as parents. They wanted to protect their children from pain, but they also knew the truth had to be shared. Shielding them forever wasn't possible. And so, together, William and Catherine guided their children through those first difficult conversations. Later that day, Catherine helped Charlotte create a memory book, pages filled with drawings, small stories, and colorful scribbles. A child's way of preserving love. George asked thoughtful questions about heaven, time, and whether love ever disappears. Even Louis, though young, clung to the idea that memories could keep someone close. It was heartbreaking, yes, but also strangely beautiful. Out of the mouths of their children came reminders of resilience. Behind closed doors, the couple leaned on each other. The palace, with all its grandeur, suddenly felt like a cage of silence. William found himself staring out at the gardens where he and his relative had once walked together, sharing advice and laughter. The flowers still bloomed, the paths remained the same, yet everything was altered. That is the strange cruelty of grief. The world looks unchanged, yet nothing is the same. As calls from staff and relatives began flooding in, William and Kate delayed their official responses. For a few more hours, they allowed themselves to simply be. They didn't put on masks of composure. They didn't rehearse what to say. They sat together in the stillness, letting the memories wash over them. They were two people stripped bare by sorrow, clinging to each other in the quiet storm of loss. That evening, after the children had been tucked into bed, William and Catherine found their first true moment alone. They traded memories of their loved one, conversations from just a week before, laughter at family dinners, advice offered in times of uncertainty. Every recollection felt like a treasure suddenly made fragile by absence. They opened photo albums, flipping through pages of holidays, christenings, and quiet dinners. Each image stirred both joy and fresh waves of grief. Outside, the palace lights glowed against the night sky. Inside, the future King and Queen of Britain sat on a simple sofa, side by side. The world would soon see them in public, composed, graceful, dutiful. But within those walls they were only William and Catherine, parents, partners, two human beings mourning the loss of someone they loved deeply. And in their togetherness, they found the only comfort that mattered, the strength to carry on side by side. By the next day, private mourning had to give way to public duty. The palace phones buzzed non-stop, staff moved swiftly through the halls, and statements were drafted for approval. William stood in his study wearing a dark suit, staring at the carefully chosen words that would soon be released to the world. On the surface it was dignified, brief, respectful, proper. But beneath those sentences lived a heartbreak words could never fully capture. How do you condense a life of kindness, wisdom, and love into a handful of lines? He knew the nation needed to be informed, yet the inadequacy of language weighed heavily on him. Catherine joined him, her expression composed but eyes still carrying the red tint of tears. Even as grief pressed on her, her first concern was for others. She asked thoughtful questions about arrangements for elderly relatives, how the children might be gently included in the ceremonies, and whether certain personal touches could honor the family member more meaningfully. That instinct, to care, to make space for others, was Catherine's quiet strength. By late afternoon, it was time for their first public appearance. Outside the palace gates, hundreds had gathered. Some carried flowers, others small handwritten cards. Many stood silently as though their very presence was the offering. The crowd parted as William and Catherine stepped forward. Side by side they greeted people not as untouchable royals, but as grieving family members willing to share their sorrow openly. The moment was striking. An elderly woman reached for Catherine's hand, her eyes wet with her own tears. She whispered about losing her husband years before, and how watching Catherine face loss with dignity gave her courage to carry on. Catherine listened intently, squeezing her hand with genuine warmth. William, too, found himself deeply moved by the stories people shared. Veterans saluted in memory of shared service. Young children offered drawings, and countless strangers whispered words of support. For nearly an hour, the couple moved slowly through the crowd, each conversation a reminder that grief is universal. Titles, wealth, status, none of it shields the human heart from loss. In that exchange of stories and sympathy, a bridge formed between the royals and the people. It was no longer about monarchy, it was about humanity. The funeral itself arrived days later. The cathedral was filled with dignitaries, charity leaders, military figures, and family friends. Yet when William and Catherine entered with their children, the focus shifted instantly to them. George walked with quiet maturity. Charlotte held tightly to her mother's hand, and Louis, still so young, clung to his father's side. Their solemn faces told a story the cameras didn't need to narrate. Even in such a formal setting, they were still just a family navigating one of life's hardest lessons. The service struck a delicate balance. Hymns chosen for their personal significance echoed through the cathedral. Readings highlighted not only public duty, but also private kindness. When William rose to deliver a tribute, the hush was absolute. His words were simple, heartfelt, and deeply human. He spoke not only as a prince but as a son, nephew, and father, someone who had been shaped by love now gone too soon. During a moment of silence, the vast cathedral seemed filled with more than grief. It was filled with gratitude, memories, and a shared sense of connection. Catherine glanced around at familiar faces, each reflecting the same bittersweet mixture of sadness and thankfulness. The atmosphere felt less like despair and more like a celebration of a life well lived. After the service, the family gathered privately at the burial site. Away from cameras, away from public eyes, the children placed flowers they had picked themselves. That simple gesture, born from Charlotte's innocent suggestion days earlier, closed the circle of love and remembrance. In the days that followed, letters and messages poured in from across Britain and beyond. People spoke of how the family's openness had helped them process their own losses, how their dignity and grief had offered comfort. For William and Catherine, these words were not just condolences. They were reminders that sorrow, when shared, can lighten its burden. As they returned to their private quarters that night, the weight of the day hung heavy on their shoulders. But when Catherine reached for William's hand, as she had on that very first morning, it carried a new meaning. It wasn't just comfort anymore. It was a promise that they would continue to face the future together, bound by love, fortified by duty, and strengthened by a nation that now grieved with them. In the end, that was the legacy of those difficult days. Not just loss, but connection. A reminder that behind the crown, behind the ceremonies, there is a family, a mother, a father, children who loved, cried, and carried on. And in their togetherness, they gave millions watching around the world something powerful, the reassurance that even in the deepest sorrow, love remains.